Welcome to another edition of Metaphysics of WW2. Here we discuss issues and topics relating to metaphysics, astrology, and astrotheology. With a basic understanding of this hidden knowledge, more light can be shed on this dark period of human history. To fully understand World War II in greater depth, one has to look beyond the time frame in which it took place. There is an enormous backstory to what we now consider as the greatest fight against competing ideologies the world has ever seen, with extraordinary beliefs priming the minds of many of those influential figures who took part, culminating in a final death toll of around 60 million people, with the total destruction of Germany and millions displaced. One has to ask, what was this vicious and bloody struggle really all about? With most of those who took part now gone, and over 70 years separating us, a new generation are beginning to ask some delving and awkward questions. Although some aspects of this topic still generate tremendous emotional baggage, leading to fear and taboos towards inquisitive investigation, many people are puzzled as to why this had to happen and unfold in the way that it did. This book will try to examine some of the beliefs and ideologies which stimulated Germany into rebelling against the constraints of globalization by uniting together under their particular form of National Socialism. Also at work, behind the scenes, was a metaphysical dimension to this period, an occult aspect influencing both the German High Command and elements within the joint forces of the Allies. This book will try to shed light on some profound metaphysical connections to both the people and events which ultimately shaped this important time in human history. Astrology is the oldest living language still in use today. References to it can be found in many ancient cultures, including both Egypt and Sumer. It is believed that this ancient language of applied astronomy could have only come from an advanced civilization who possessed a comprehensive understanding of the cosmos and the solar system. This truly is the language of the gods. This book is written based on my personal interpretation of information and events gathered. Readers might develop their own view and understanding from it. Some subjects tackled here are of a sensitive nature, and it is not my intention to disrespect or offend anyone with alternative beliefs. During the mid to late 19th century, there was a renaissance in occult interests, occult meaning hidden, part of which was to understand the truth behind human history. Throughout the Victorian age, great advances were made in science, technology, and overall understanding of the environment. However, archaeologists and explorers were finding things which appeared to be anomalies, out of the place artifacts and structures which did not fit the narrative of how they saw our primitive ancestors, and to which lineal progressive evolution was brought into question. Monuments such as the Great Pyramids at Giza and ancient megalithic structures of South America suggest there was once an advanced ancient civilization which ended for reasons unknown, leaving sporadic clues of its once mighty existence. From this interest, a generation became fascinated with ancient myths and legends which conjured up romantic visions of a master race ruling the ancient antediluvian world. Today, the majority of the scientific and historical establishment view Atlantis as a fictitious island, made up by Plato in one of his monologues back in 360 BC. The existence of a lost civilization of a dominant race could potentially be part of the puzzle to our vague and mysterious past. The only authentic description of Atlantis comes from Plato's account mentioned in his works of Timaeus and Critias. His description originated from Solon, one of Plato's ancestors, a lawmaker from Athens who lived 200 years before Plato. Plutarch tells of Solon's visit to Egypt, where he spent 10 years conversing with Egyptian high priests about philosophy and history. This credible philosopher and lawmaker from Athens was told by the high priests that you Athenians have no antiquity of history and no history of antiquity, and that human history goes back many thousands of years, even before the kingdoms of Egypt. They told him of an ancient civilization which lived out in the Atlantic, on a great island, full of high culture and plenty. Solon, realizing the importance of this part of human history, began to record his new findings. Unfortunately, he died before he finished his work. Many years later, with the help of Solon's notes, Plato reconstructed his own view of Atlantis within his works of Timaeus and Critias. In the first place, you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. In the next place, you do not know that there formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, and that you and your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of them which survived. And this was unknown to you, because for many generations the survivors of that destruction died, leaving no written word. For there was a time, Solon, before the great deluge of all, when the city which now is Athens was first in war, and in every way the best governed of all cities, is said to have performed the noblest deeds, and to have had the fairest constitution of any of which tradition tells under the face of heaven. Solon marvelled at his words, and earnestly requested the priests to inform him exactly and in order about these former citizens. "You are welcome to hear about them, Solon," said the priest, "both for your own sake and for that of your city, and above all for the sake of the goddess who is the common patron and parent and educator of both our cities. She founded your city 1,000 years before ours, receiving from the earth and Hephaestus the seed of your race, and afterwards she founded ours, of which the constitution is recorded in our sacred registers to be 8,000 years old. As touching your citizens of 9,000 years ago, I will briefly inform you of their laws, of their most famous action. The exact particulars of the whole we will hereafter go through at our leisure in the sacred registers themselves. If you compare these very laws with ours, you will find that many of ours are the counterpart of yours as they were in the olden times. Many great and wonderful deeds are recorded of your state in our histories, but one of them exceeds all the rest in greatness and valour. For these histories tell of a mighty power which unprovoked made an expedition against the whole of Europe and Asia, and to which your city put an end. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the straits of Heracles, is only a harbour, having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent. Now in this island of Atlantis there was a great and wonderful empire, which had rule over the whole island and several others, and over part of the continent. And furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. This vast power, gathered into one, endeavoured to subdue at a blow our country and yours, and the whole of the region within the straits, and then, Solon, your country shone forth in the excellence of her virtue and strength among all mankind. She was preeminent in courage and military skill, and was the leader of the Hellenes, and when the rest fell off from her, being compelled to stand alone, after having undergone the very extremity of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way. And this was caused by the subsidence of the island. Excerpt from Timaeus by Plato, circa 400 BC. In addition to this initial description of Atlantis, found in Plato's Timaeus was a detailed account of the interior of the island, which is mentioned in Plato's Critias. Let me begin by observing first of all that 9,000 was the sum of years which had elapsed since the war which was said to have taken place between those who dwelt outside the pillars of Heracles and all who dwelt within them. This war I am going to describe. Of the combatants on one side, the city of Athens was reported to have been the leader and to have fought out the war. The combatants on the other side were commanded by the kings of Atlantis, which, as was saying, was an island greater in extent than Libya and Asia, and when afterwards sunk by an earthquake, became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing from hence to any part of the ocean. The progress of the history will unfold the various nations of barbarians and families of Hellenes which then existed, as they successively appeared on the scene. But I must describe first of all Athenians of that day, and their enemies who fought with them, and then the respective powers and governments of the two kingdoms. Let us give the precedence to Athens. In the days of old, the gods had the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. There was no quarrelling, for you cannot rightly suppose that the gods did not know what was proper for each of them to have, or, knowing this, that they would seek to procure for themselves by contention that which more properly belonged to others. Although Plato's account of Atlantis is regarded as the only significant source remaining, there are other smaller references from various other sources which mention an important island somewhere in the Atlantic. One reason for the lack of exact corroborating references is that the name Atlantis could have been known by different people at different times as something else. In his book The Odyssey, Homer wrote about Odysseus's journey from Calypso's island, Ogygia, some believe to be Atlantis, back to his home in Greece. Calypso helps him build a new boat and stocks it with provisions from her island. With sadness, she watched as the object of her love sails away. After 18 days at sea, Odysseus spots Scheria, the island of the Phoenicians, his next destination appointed by the gods. In Herodotus's histories, he refers to an Atlantean sea, of a mountain called Atlas, of a river called Atlas, and of a people known as Atlanteans. At the distance of 10 days' journey from the Garamantians, there is again another salt hill and spring of water, around which dwell a people called the Atarantians, who alone of all known nations are destitute of names. The title of Atarantians is borne by the whole race in common, but the men have no particular names of their own. The Atarantians, when the sun rises high in the heavens, curse him, and load him with reproaches, because they say he burns and wastes both their country and themselves. Once more, at the distance of 10 days, there is a salt hill and spring, and an inhabited tract. Near the salt is a mountain called Atlas, very taper and round, so lofty, moreover, that the top, it is said, cannot be seen, the clouds never quitting it either summer or winter. The natives call this mountain the Pillar of Heaven, and they themselves take their name from it, being called Atlantis. Crantor was a Greek philosopher who went to Sais to corroborate Plato's story of Atlantis. Crantor of Soli came to Sais and saw there in the temple of Neith the column completely covered with hieroglyphs, on which the history of Atlantis was recorded. Scholars translated it for him, and he testified that their account fully agreed with Plato's account of Atlantis. Crantor, even it seems, went to the length of sending a special inquiry to Egypt to verify the sources of the story, and the priest replied that the records of it were still extant on pillars. Apollodorus of Athens, 180 BC, wrote, "Athena therefore called the city of Athens after herself, and Poseidon, in hot anger, flooded the Triasian plain and laid Attica under the sea." Diodorus Siculus, 1st century BC, was a Greek historian who wrote about a large island beyond the pillars of Heracles. Diodorus Siculus related that the Phoenicians discovered a large island in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the pillars of Heracles, 7 days' sail from the coast of Africa. This island abounded in all manner of riches. The soil was exceedingly fertile. The scenery was diversified by rivers, mountains, and forests. Pliny the Young, 1st century AD, was a lawyer, author, and magistrate of ancient Rome. According to Frank Joseph in his book, The Destruction of Atlantis, Pliny the Young mentioned numerous sandbanks immediately outside the pillars of Heracles, even as late as the imperial period, circa 100 AD. A few accounts give us clues to its whereabouts, the nature of the island, and how it finally sank beneath the waves. This power came forth out of the Atlantic Ocean, for in those days the Atlantic was navigable, and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way to the other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the straits of Heracles, is only a harbour, having a narrow entrance, but that other sea is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent. Plato's Timaeus. According to the above ancient writers and historians, we have 3 separate accounts of where this magnificent island civilization once was. Homer, after 18 days at sea, Odysseus spots Scheria, the island of the Phoenicians, his next destination appointed by the gods. Herodotus, at the distance of 10 days' journey from the Garamantians, there is again another salt hill and spring of water, around which dwell a people called the Atarantians. Diodorus Siculus, a large island in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Heracles, several days' sail from the coast of Africa. If we plot these distances on a map from their relative positions inside the Pillars of Heracles out into the Atlantic, we should have a good idea where this place Atlantis was. Bearing in mind, we are talking about an island which sank into the ocean due to a deluge, caused by some kind of cataclysmic disaster. Ancient boats would comfortably achieve an average speed of between 4 and 5 knots. This allows them to travel roughly 100 nautical miles per day. Homer's Odyssey, 18 days from Atlantis to Greece. At between 5 to 6 knots, a boat can sail approximately 125 nautical miles per day. 125 times 18 equals 2,250 nautical miles. From Athens to the Azores is 2,300 nautical miles. Diodorus Siculus, beyond the Pillars of Heracles, 7 days sailing from the coast of Africa. At 6 knots, a boat can sail approximately 130 nautical miles per day. 130 times 7 equals 910 nautical miles. From Morocco to the Azores is 915 nautical miles. Herodotus's journey from the Garamantians, 10 days sailing from the Berber cities of northwest Africa. At around 5 knots, a boat can sail approximately 1,100 nautical miles in 10 days. It is 1,100 nautical miles from the Garamantians to the Azores. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea, for which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. Plato's Timaeus. Here we have a reference to earthquakes and floods, which would suggest an island susceptible to some serious seismic activity. This is exactly what we find in the Azores, an archipelago composed of volcanic islands, situated over an array of tectonic fault lines, including the mid-Atlantic ridge, the Terceira Rift, and the Gloria Fault. It is possible that thousands of years ago there was a formidable landmass, which over time, being subjected to an assortment of earthquakes, eruptions and tsunamis, along with the rise in sea level from an ending ice age, would have transformed a once significant island into what it is today. According to Plato's account of Atlantis, a highly advanced civilization thrived 9,000 years before the time of Solon. Plato wrote his work around 360 BC, 200 years after Solon. So today, this would give us a date of approximately 11,570 BC. Around 11,500 years ago, the last ice age abruptly ended, causing sea levels to rise. Before the ice began to melt, the sea levels all over the world were 120 meters lower than they are today. That's equivalent to a 36-story building. This would make the Atlantic Ocean a lot shallower, giving credence to a large landmass where the Azores archipelago islands are now. Also, with the sudden disappearance of a formidable landmass in the middle of the Atlantic, the Gulf Stream carrying warm waters north would be unhindered, adding more warmth to the melting ice. It has also been suggested by various scholars within the scientific community that some form of cosmic disruption may have been the trigger which brought about these biblical earth changes. Follow this multidisciplinary scientific study as it examines the evidence of a great global cataclysm that occurred only 11,500 years ago. Crustal shifting, the tilting of Earth's axis, mass extinctions, up-thrusted mountain ranges, rising and shrinking land masses, and gigantic volcanic eruptions and earthquakes all indicate that a fateful confrontation with a destructive cosmic visitor must have occurred. The abundant geological, biological, and climatological evidence from this dire event calls into question many geological theories and will awaken our memories to our true and not so distant past. Cataclysm. Ancient stone carvings found at Göbekli Tepe confirmed that a comet struck the earth around 11,000 BC. A devastating event which wiped out woolly mammoths and sparked the rise of civilization. The Telegraph, Science, 2017. If a large comet was the trigger which initiated a cataclysm bringing about a deluge, then it would be plausible to assume that this event could also trigger disturbances to the mid-Atlantic ridge, along with all the other fault lines beneath the Azores. The references to Atlantis refer to an advanced culture and civilization, a seafaring nation which had influence and traded with many parts of the ancient world, a race of beings which appeared to be different and more sophisticated than the rest of humanity, and could well be our closest connection to the gods of the old world, those men of renown who once lived amongst us. Any survivors of the deluge which sank Atlantis would have had to seek refuge elsewhere, initially in the areas around the Atlantic Ocean. You do not know that there formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, and that you and your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of them which survived. And this was unknown to you, because for many generations the survivors of that destruction died, leaving no written word. For there was a time, Solon, before the great deluge of all, when the city which now is Athens was first in war and in every way the best governed of all cities, is said to have performed the noblest deeds and to have had the fairest constitution of any of which tradition tells under the face of heaven. Plato's Timaeus. Of the combatants on the one side, the city of Athens was reported to have been the leader and to have fought out the war. The combatants on the other side were commanded by the kings of Atlantis. In the days of old, the gods and the whole earth distributed among them by allotment. Now different gods had their allotments in different places, which they set in order. I have before remarked in speaking of the allotments of the gods, that they distributed the whole earth into portions differing in extent, and made for themselves temples, and instituted sacrifices, and Poseidon, receiving his lot, the island of Atlantis, begat children by a mortal woman, and settled them in a part of the island, which I will describe. In this mountain there dwelt one of the earth-born primeval men of that country, whose name was Evanor, and he had a wife named Leucippe, and they had an only daughter, who was called Cleito. The maiden had already reached womanhood. When her father and mother died, Poseidon fell in love with her and had intercourse with her. He also begat and brought up 5 pairs of twin male children, and divided the island of Atlantis into 10 portions. He gave to the firstborn of the eldest pair his mother's dwelling and the surrounding allotment, which was the largest and best, and made him king over the rest. The others he made princes, and gave them rule over many men and a large territory. Plato's Critias. Genesis 6. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be numbered 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowl of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Genesis 6:1-8. For because of the greatness of their empire, many things were brought to them from foreign countries, and the island itself provided most of what was required by them for the uses of life. Each of the 10 kings in his own division and in his own city had the absolute control of the citizens, and in most cases of the laws, punishing and slaying whomsoever he would. Such was the vast power which the gods settled in the lost island of Atlantis, and this he afterwards directed against our land for the following reasons, as tradition tells, for many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws, and well affectioned towards the God, whose seed they were, for they possessed true and in every way great spirits, uniting gentleness with wisdom in the various chances of life, and in their intercourse with one another. Plato's Critias. It could be suggested that these godlike beings who came to this planet first settled on the abundant plains of Atlantis, breeding with the indigenous earthlings, or even genetically modifying some natives who they could use to cultivate working communities, mixing along the way to produce different hybrid cultures. when their main island in the Atlantic sank, any survivors would have found refuge in those towns, cities, and villages still operational, around the edges of the Atlantic Ocean, taking a lead role in influencing and organizing those indigenous natives who were not hostile to them. All around the world there are ancient myths and legends which talk about a great flood that wiped out a large proportion of the Earth's population, a deluge so massive it left its mark in the collective consciousness of humanity. Tales of an advanced civilization who dwelt on an island paradise, swallowed up by the advancing floodwaters, brought about by either cosmic forces or the wrath of an angry god. The legends coming from Europe, Egypt, and Africa place this sunken paradise to the west, while the legends of the Americans place it in the east, pointing towards the Atlantic Ocean. Although there seems to have been a huge flood at one time, many smaller floods would have also impacted different areas of the planet at different times, leaving a legacy behind of stories about disasters in our ancient past. According to Hesiod's theogony, there were 5 ages of man. They also mention 3 great floods: the Ogygian flood, which ended the Silver Age, the Deucalion flood, which ended the Bronze Age, and the Dardanus flood. The Golden Age, a time of virtue and plenty, ruled by Titan Kronos. This golden period ended in a war when the children of Kronos joined together to fight the Titans. The Silver Age, after the defeat of Kronos, led by Zeus, the world was now ruled by the Olympians. During this age, the majority of humans refused to obey the gods. Zeus ended the Silver Age by killing the humans who disappointed him. Bronze Age. Zeus created a new type of human being, strong and aggressive, with weapons, armor, and homes made from bronze. These men worshipped the war god Ares, ate the hearts of their enemies, and finally massacred one another. The Age of Heroes. Zeus caused a great flood so he could produce another kind of man. Great men were born. This was the time in which the great Trojan Wars were fought. Finally, Zeus created the Age of Iron, and just like all the other ages, this one is doomed to fail. When it does, Zeus will return to remake the world. The Ogygian flood is named after the mythical king of Attica and the founder of Thebes. This flood covered the whole world, leaving the country without a ruler until the reign of Cecrops in 1556 BC. Deucalion was the son of Prometheus, the last Titan god. Prometheus and Zeus were in conflict. Prometheus, along with the goddess Athena, created man. But when mankind became mean, greedy, and disobedient, Zeus decided to destroy them. Deucalion, in an effort to control the animal-like instinct of mankind, asked Zeus to be merciful. But Zeus had already decided to destroy this version of mankind. Prometheus asked Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha to construct an ark in order to save themselves from the coming flood sent by Zeus. For 9 days and 9 nights it rained and thundered, flooding the land and drowning everyone except for a few who managed to save themselves. After the flood was over, Deucalion and Pyrrha landed on a mount. The myth says that once they realized the extent of the destruction, tears kept pouring from their eyes. There is a flood myth in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. However, the papyrus containing the actual flood story is damaged, but the reference to the flood says the people became rebellious, and the god Atum said he will destroy all he made and return the earth to the primordial waters Nun, back to its original state. Atum took on the form of a serpent along with Osiris. In Frank Joseph's book, The Atlantis Encyclopedia, he states that the earliest known name for Thoth, the patron god of wisdom, medicine, literature and hieroglyphic writing, who arrived in Egypt after a deluge destroyed his home in the distant west. These western origins, together with the At beginning his name, define him as an Atlantean deity. Arab tradition identifies him as the architect of Egypt's Great Pyramid and the Giza Plateau. Thoth was also linked to At-Hothis, being the same person. Could At-Hothis be a reference to Atlantis? Mexico-Aztec mythology. There are many variations to the Aztecs' flood myth, the most famous being that of Nota. This version was recorded by the Spanish during their conquest in the 15th century. When the Sun Age came, there had passed 400 years. Then came 200 years. Then 76. Then all mankind was lost and drowned and turned to fishes. The water and the sky drew near each other. In a single day all was lost. But before the flood began, Titlacahuan had warned the man Nota and his wife Nena, saying, "Make no more pulque, but hollow a great cypress, into which you shall enter the mouth Tozostli. The waters shall near the sky." They entered, And when Titlacahuan had shut them in, he said to the man, Thou shalt eat but a single ear of maize, and thy wife but one also. And when they had each eaten 1 ear of maize, they prepared to go forth, for the water was tranquil. Ancient Aztec document, New World Encyclopedia. The interesting thing about the Aztecs is their mythology concerning where they originated from. They say they came from a place called Aztlan, White Land, a paradise ruled by a tyrannical elite named Azteca Chicamoztoca. Another Aztec variation to the flood story tells of survivors to the Great Flood going on to produce both the Toltec and Aztec races. In Aztec mythology, Coxcox was the only male survivor of a worldwide flood. The Aztecs believed that only Coxcox and his wife, Xochiquetzal, survived the flood. They took refuge in the hollow trunk of a cypress, which floated on top of the water and finally banked on a mountain in Culhuacan. They had many children, but all of them were dumb. The Great Spirit took pity on them and sent a dove, which attempted to teach the children how to speak. 15 of them succeeded, and from these the Aztecs believed the Toltecs and Aztecs were descended. When the Spanish first arrived on the shores of Mexico and South America, they noted many accounts from various tribes referring to a bearded god who in the distant past taught their ancestors many new cultural things. The Aztec god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was also known as Viracocha by the Incas, Kukulcan by the Mayans, Gucumas in Central America, Zamna in Izamal, and Voton in Palenque. He, along with his companions, were described as being tall, bearded, with white skin, someone of stature, with hair on the face, and beautiful emerald blue eyes. These legends all seem to agree that Quetzalcoatl was tall, light-skinned, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and wearing a beard. His name translates to plumed serpent. In Hopi mythology, most people moved away from the ways of the creator god, Sotu Knang, and he destroyed the world first by fire and then by cold, recreating it both times for people that still followed the laws of creation, who survived by hiding underground. People became corrupt and warlike a third time. As a result, Sotu Knang guided the people to Spider-Woman, his helper in the creation process, and she cut down giant reeds and sheltered the people in the hollow stems. Sotu Knang then caused a great flood, and the people floated atop the water in their reeds. The reeds came to rest on a small piece of land, and the people emerged with as much food as they started with. The people travelled on in their canoes, guided by their inner wisdom, which is said to come from Sotu Knang through the door at the top of their head. They travelled to the northeast, passing progressively larger islands until they came to the fourth world, a great landmass. The islands then sunk into the ocean. In Inca mythology, the god Viracocha, the creator of civilization, destroyed the giants, as well as the other inhabitants around Lake Titicaca with a great flood, and 2 people repopulated the earth. they survived in sealed caves. In Norse mythology, the giant Bergelma was a son of Thundergelma and the grandson of Orgelma, the founder of the race of forest giants. Bergelma and his wife were the only forest giants to survive the deluge of Orgelma's blood when Odin and his brothers butchered him. The giant couple survived by crawling into a hollow tree trunk and then founded a new race of forest giants. Noah in the Judeo-Christian Bible. After the generation of Adam, the earth became corrupted and filled with violence. Therefore God repented of ever creating them and decided to destroy man and all beasts from its surface, except for Noah, who was a righteous man. God told Noah that he was about to send a flood upon the earth, and everything that was in it would die. Though God made a covenant to spare Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, God ordered Noah to build an ark and to take his family in it. God also commanded him to bring the beasts. Noah did according to God's command. Then when Noah was 600 years old, all the fountains of the great deep broke up, and the windows of heaven were opened. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and the water prevailed for 150 days. The water covered all the hills and mountains. All the beasts and every man died, except for Noah and everything inside the ark. Then God remembered Noah and every living thing that were in the ark. So he restrained the water from the heaven, and the water returned to the earth continually. On the 7th day of the 7th month, the ark rested upon the mountain of Ararat, today Turkey. The water decreased continually until the 10th month. The tops of the mountains could be seen again. 40 days later, Noah opened the window from the ark and sent a raven and a dove to see whether the waters were dried up from the earth. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and it returned to Noah in the ark. 7 days later he tried again, and the dove came back with an olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters were abated from the earth. 7 days later he sent forth the dove again, which did not return to him any more. So Noah and his wife, 3 sons, their wives, and all the beasts came out of the ark, and was commanded by God to multiply and replenish the earth. Noah built an altar and sacrificed some clean beasts and clean fowls, and offered them on the altar. After the flood, Noah and his family lived in Ararat with his wife and 3 sons and wives, and they replenished the earth. The Epic of Gilgamesh is very similar to the Noah flood story, with a few small differences. The Miao tribes who lived in inland China talk about how God created the heavens and the earth, and created man and woman. They also talk about the wickedness of humanity, and God sending a flood. Immense flooding covered the entire earth, and only one family, the family of Fuhi, was saved. This family consisted of a man, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters, who were all saved alive in a boat. It says that it poured 40 days, then it flooded, and then 45 days of misting and drizzle. The righteous person who was saved was called Noah, and he built a boat, very wide and vast. His family of 8 survived, along with male and female pairs of animals, After the flood had receded, they offered sacrifices to God, and God gave them his good graces. The Arabians were originally the people of Ad. They referred to their ancestors as a multitude of tribes known as Adites. Could this be a derivative of Atlantis or Atlantis? In the Indian Hindu myth of Matsya Avatar, fish incarnation, the Supreme Lord said, "On the seventh day from today, O subduer of the enemies, this threefold creation of earth, ether and heaven will be flooded by the all-devouring ocean. When the three worlds are submerged in the waters of annihilation, a very big boat will appear that I have sent to you. Collect all higher and lower kinds of herbs and seeds before you get on that huge boat, together with the 7 sages and all kinds of living beings. Then travel undaunted the ocean of the flood, with no other illumination but the light of the rishis. When the boat is being tossed about by the very powerful wind, you can attach it to the great serpent Vashuki, to my horn, for I will be near you. I will drag you and the sages on the boat, with me over the waters throughout the night of Brahma, O my best one. With my support upon your inquiries, in your heart the full knowledge will be revealed of my glory that is known as the Supreme Brahma." Srimad Bhagavatam. The Bhagavata Purana mentions 12 Aditeyas, who are each sun gods. On each month, a different Aditeya is thought to shine over the rest. Could the Aditeyas be the same as the gods of Atlantis? The 3 worlds mentioned in the Hindu Srimad Bhagavatam could be referring to the 3 main areas under the influence of the Atlanteans: Europe, Africa, the western continent of the Americas, and Atlantis itself. During the Ice Age, most of the northern hemisphere was covered in ice. It was only those land areas relatively near to the equator which were comfortably habitable. According to the Greek poet Hesiod, in his Theogony, in the beginning there was only chaos and a void, empty space. Gaia, Earth, came into existence to become the home of the gods. Also chaos gave birth to Erebus, the darkness of the underworld. Gaia, Earth, gave birth to Uranus, heavens, and Oceanus, oceans. The gods lived on the earth and mated with one another. Uranus and Gaia were the first gods to rule. They mated to produce Cyclopses and the 12 Titans, a race of giants who would rule the Golden Age. This is the origins of the Greek pantheon of gods. Uranus became jealous of his offspring, so Gaia, with the help from Kronos, pushed Uranus out, castrating him along the way. His genitals fell to the earth, creating another set of gods, of giants and nymphs, including Aphrodite and Erineus. Gaia and Uranus gave Kronos a prophecy, telling him that one of his sons would depose him. As a result, Kronos swallowed his children. This made Gaia angry, so she saved one of their babies, named Zeus. When Zeus grew up, with the help of the other Titans, made Kronos cough up the swallowed children. Following this, the 6 brothers and sisters joined Zeus in overthrowing Kronos and sent him to the dark underworld. These new rebel gods, who lived on the peak of Mount Olympus, divided the universe up between themselves and ruled over all, with Zeus being the supreme god. It is purported by Ignatius Donnelly in his book The Antediluvian World that the gods of Greece who dwelt on Olympus were really the kings of Atlantis, and that Olympus was in fact Atlantis. He also says that in Greek tradition Olympus was situated far out west, in the ocean beyond Africa, where the sun continued to shine where it no longer shone in Greece. The Akkadians were people of an extinct Eastern Semitic language who lived in Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, from 3000 BC. Clay tablets written during the 18th century BC recorded an epic story known as the Atrahasis, which includes a detailed account of both the creation of man along with the deluge. Many scholars believe this to be the basis of the Bible's Genesis story. The Aztec creation story is based on a continuous cycle of creation and destruction. They refer to these cycles as suns. In the beginning there was darkness, a void. Creation began with the Lord and Lady of Duality, Omatekuti and Omachuatl. The first god was both good, bad, male and female. This god gave birth to 4 other gods, Huizilop Ochitl, Quetzalcoatl, Tezcatlipoca, and Zipetotec, who went on to create the world. To create humanity, they sacrificed one of the gods, dripping his blood over a pile of bones, which gave rise to the first man, Oxomoco, and the first woman, Kipaktonat. After the creation of the earth, with man being complete, a cycle of 5 suns or 5 world ages began. We are now in the 5th sun, with each one ending in destruction. The first sun. This is an age influenced by the element of earth. Tezcatlipoca was sacrificed to provide the energy source for the earth. Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca fought one another, and when Tezcatlipoca lost, he sent jaguars to the earth to destroy all the giants. This brought about the end of the first sun. The second sun. This age is influenced by the element air. Quetzalcoatl is the ruler over this period, where man was created in the same form as we are today, but became corrupted. Tezcatlipoca, a rival to Quetzalcoatl, turned humanity into monkeys. Quetzalcoatl, angry at this, sent forth hurricanes to kill off all the monkeys. A few survived to produce the monkeys we see today. The third sun. This age is influenced by the element fire. The god ruling this period is Tlaloc, a god of water and rain. A battle ensued between Tlaloc and Tezcatlipoca, in which Tlaloc turned all of humanity into turkeys, dogs and butterflies. Quetzalcoatl once again destroyed humanity by raining down on them fire and ash. The fourth sun. This age is influenced by the element water. Calchiotlicu, the sister of Talco, reigns over this age. Once again, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca fight. which result in bringing the sun down. Humanity was turned into fish by a great flood, bringing the age to an end. The fifth sun. This is the age we are in now, ruled by a god called Nanahuadzin. It had been predicted that this fifth age will come to an end via earthquakes. The Maya creation story. In the beginning, there was only sky and a calm sea. The creator Tepu and Gukamats were in the water surrounded by light. They came together to produce the earth, mountains and valleys. Animals were created, followed by humans. The gods desired to be praised and venerated, so they set about creating living beings to worship them. Their first attempts were unsuccessful. Animal, mudman and woodman had no ability to speak, with no souls or intellect. They fell out of favour with the gods and caused them to be beaten and disfigured, before engulfing them in a deluge of resin. A fourth attempt at creating man was successful by using white and yellow corn. 4 men were initially made, followed by a woman, but the gods, alarmed at the success of their creation, decided to prevent man having divine powers, so they put fog on the human eyes. From these first men and women came the leading Keech descendants. Although these myths point to an alternative beginning for humanity, is there any tangible evidence to support these claims? For many years, archaeologists and scientists have been baffled by the number of ancient megaliths scattered all over the globe, some individual stones weighing over 1,000 tons, a near impossible task for us to construct today. But for giants with advanced technology and divine abilities, this could well be a piece of cake. If Atlantis was a successful seafaring civilization who traded and influenced other parts of the world, one would expect to see remnants of their work as trading posts or offshoots of the main island and cultural centre. We do find in both South America and places around the Mediterranean ancient megalithic structures and building techniques which we would find difficult to reproduce today. It appears in some parts of the world that the really old structures are far superior and larger than anything following thereafter. There is an ancient polygonal construction technique made from huge blocks, all fitting tightly together. This form of construction would challenge even our best craftsmen today. However, if we consider that the Atlanteans lived on a volcanic island over multiple tectonic plates and fault lines, it would make sense for them to develop earthquake-resistant walls. The reason these polygonal walls are still with us today is precisely because they are both earthquake-resistant and too big for most modern civilizations to move. Manetho was an Egyptian historian and priest who lived during the Ptolemaic era in the 3rd century BC. He wrote the famous Egyptica, History of Egypt, which is often used by us in anthropology to identify the chronology of the reigns of pharaohs. His translation of the Egyptian king lists reveals that the total number of years covered by all the king's lists equals 36,525. According to the chronology of Manetho, about 36,525 years ago, gods on earth began to rule earth, lasting until about 22,625 years ago, when demigods succeeded them, until about 11,600 years ago, when mortal humans began to rule until the present day. This time frame perfectly matches the period of Cro-Magnon man in the fossil records. Robert Seffer, Species with Amnesia, Our Forgotten History. Manetho points out that the first king who ruled Egypt was from a foreign land, and that Egypt was either a conquered nation or a colony of that land. Thoth was a deity in the old Egyptian pantheon. He was credited with bringing knowledge, measurement, wisdom, and writing to Egypt. Thoth came from an island of flame, which could be a reference to the orichalcum, red gold, which was used to cover the walls in the inner citadel in Atlantis. Seb is the father of Isis and Osiris, which is supposed to be the same as Saturn Kronos. Seb later became known as Repha. Rephaim in Hebrew refers to people of great height, possibly even giants. The only physical evidence of an ancient culture to survive 12,000 years are items, objects, and structures made from stone, gold, and silver. Anything else would have corroded or decayed, leaving very little in its wake. The sheer scale and quantity of some of the ancient megalithic work is breathtaking. Definitely not the work of a primitive civilization. It could very well be the work of the gods. In 2013, Diocletian Silver, an amateur sailor, stumbled across an underwater anomaly between the island of San Miguel and Terceira, off the coast of the Azores. Silver was reported to have detected a perfectly square structure which was orientated to the cardinal points. Suspecting it to be some kind of ancient man-made structure, he informed the Coast Guard and the Portuguese Navy. The Navy, referring to old sonar maps, dismissed the claim as an undersea mount, choosing not to investigate. R.W. Kolb found many diatoms, algae, from fresh water on the mid-Atlantic ridge, from core samples that were taken over 900 kilometers from the coast of West Africa. He claimed this was evidence that the area in question was above the water as an island landmass between 10 and 12,000 years ago. The diatoms found were deposited as sediment in freshwater lakes thousands of years ago, later inundated under 3 kilometers of seawater. B.C. Hezon reports that at 37 degrees north, the Atlantis seamount, located on the mid-Atlantic ridge, is flat-topped at a depth of around 180 fathoms. Around a ton of limestone cobbles were brought up from the summit, a sample of which gave a radiocarbon date of 12,000 plus or minus 900 years BC. B.C. Hezon and colleagues stated that the limestone was lichefied in a location above the water, and that this is evidence that the seamount had once been an island, but was submerged in the last 12,000 years. Wikiversity. Atlantis location hypothesis. I would suggest that many megalithic structures found in Egypt, the Middle East, Europe, and South America are the remains of the Atlantean civilization, of giant godlike hybrids and various other races, with sophisticated technology and skills, which thrived before the Great Deluge of around 12,000 years ago. It is only relatively recently, with the aid of modern technology, that we have managed to pinpoint a time in history when a great cataclysm was likely to have taken place. It is therefore more than just a coincidence for Plato to pick a date of 9,000 years prior to Solon's time for a great deluge to have happened. This in itself gives credence to Plato's story, pulling it out of the realms of fiction and into the world of possibility. There were giants, Nephilim, in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, and the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Genesis 6:4. Zecharia Sitchin, a Soviet-born American, wrote many books about an alternative to the origins of the human race. He was one of a handful of people able to decipher ancient Sumerian clay tablets. He pieced together a different version of human history, believing that a highly advanced race of human-like beings came to Earth from the planet Nibiru around 450,000 years ago. The planet Nibiru, he suggested, was part of our solar system, with an elliptical orbit far beyond Neptune. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, the offspring of Anu, a sky god. They are also suspected as being the Nephilim mentioned in Genesis. According to Sitchin, the Sumerian writings talk of how the Anunnaki initially came to this planet looking for rare minerals. To help them mine these minerals, they created a slave race of humanoids known as Homo sapiens. To do this, they mixed their Anunnaki genes with the native Homo erectus, creating the basis of what we are today. They also created a super race which had a greater percentage of Anunnaki gene, making them men of renown. These became the rulers, who were given the divine right of kings, a superior Anunnaki human hybrid bloodline. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Numbers 13:33. And there was yet a battle in Gath, where was a man of great stature, that had on every hand 6 fingers, and on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number, and he also was born to the giant. 2 Samuel 21:20. For only Og, king of Bashan, remained of the remnant of giants. Behold, his bedstead was a bedstead of iron. It is not in Rabbath of the children of Ammon. 9 cubits was the length thereof, and 4 cubits the breadth of it, after the cubit of a man. Deuteronomy 3:11. A bed of 9 by 4 cubits would be equivalent to 13.5 times 6 feet, compared to a standard king-size bed of 6.6 by 6 feet. You can appreciate the scale. It makes sense from the perspective of the Nephilim ruling elite to create a slave race half their size or less. These four were born to the giants in Gath, and fell by the hand of David, and by the hand of his servants. 2 Samuel 21:22. The legend of Troy was considered a myth until recently. It too was described by Homer and other ancient scholars in writings over 2,000 years ago. It was discovered in the region of classical antiquity, on the west coast of Turkey, in the mouth of the Dardanelles. The German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann spent years during the 1870s unearthing the legendary city, which is now accepted as the place of the Trojan War. The ruling classes throughout history have sought to keep their blood lineage pure, undiluted by breeding incessantly among themselves. If their DNA is indeed special, with a greater percentage of superior genetics descending from the gods of the ancient world, then one would understand and expect them to keep this tradition. If these godlike creatures did come to earth and interbreed with the indigenous ape-man, creating us and our elite bloodlines, we could expect the elite blood lineage to also have a greater spiritual connection to these extra-dimensional gods. Another group of people who try to preserve their blood lineage are those serious about Judaism. The Talmud states that Jewish marriage, kiddushin, can only take place between Jews. However, modern social pressures have led many of today's Jews to abandon this practice. A survey conducted in 2013 by the Pew Research Center found that 58% of Orthodox Jews had some form of mixed marriage and 78% in the non-Orthodox group. So why is this important? And what has it to do with World War II? If the claims of the German National Socialists concerning superior and inferior races has any credibility, they must have developed that idea from somewhere. It appears that around the turn of the 20th century, many cultures signed up to the theory of racial differences, believing some races expressed qualities of superior levels of consciousness. The pre-war Germans' fascination with occultism and ancient mythology splintered into an obsessive desire to connect themselves genetically to those super races which once ruled the ancient world. An interesting point to make here is that before the First World War, many ruling monarchs of Europe were of German descent, the bloodlines of nobility going way back. The British monarch, during the First World War in 1917, decided to change their German surname of Saxe, Coburg and Gotha to the more English-sounding name of Windsor. This was all done in an effort to distance themselves in the eyes of the public from their relatives ruling Germany.